This first story was submitted on r/paranormal by Holler Horrors, and its title is Paranormal School. My friends and I, who I will refer to as A, E, S, and D if necessary, have been getting into paranormal investigations over the last few years. We aren't professionals by any means, nor do we claim to be. It's just something that we enjoy doing whenever we're all able to get together. We've gone to a few supposedly haunted locations and done some investigations, but nothing prepared us for what we experienced in this story. So one day, we were discussing where we should go for our next paranormal investigation. We had just finished another investigation a couple nights prior, so we were still feeling brave from that. As we were discussing where we should go, one of our friends suggested that we should check out this old abandoned school in rural Tennessee. We had heard stories about this school from videos on YouTube and just from online searches. If you know the story about the boy who was bullied to death and buried underneath the floorboards, then you'll know what school I am referring to. If you don't know the story, then I'll give you a brief summary. A young boy was cornered in the boys' bathroom at his school by his bully. The bully beat him up so badly that he ended up succumbing to his injuries and died on the spot. The bully, in a panic, realizing what he had just done, decided to pull up some floorboards with his pocket knife and stash the body underneath them. Because of how brutal it was, it is said that something very dark and malevolent is said to haunt the school, as well as the boy. Some even speculate that this dark spirit is what drove the bully to take it so far and kill the boy. Now back to the story. Sadly, our friend A wasn't able to come with us on this investigation, so I invited another of my friends, who I'll refer to as H. H wasn't really into the paranormal like the rest of us are, but agreed to come anyways, just to hang out and have something to do. So we all got in our cars and drove to the school, hoping to have some paranormal experiences and maybe even capture some paranormal evidence that we could show off online. When we got to the school, we quickly realized that the pictures and videos we had seen online did not do the real thing justice. It was creepy. The entire place was covered in shrubbery, vines, and graffiti. The windows had been busted out and the doors were off their hinges, presumably from all the local kids looking to get a rush by breaking into and exploring a creepy abandoned school. We walked around the school and eventually found the entrance to the basement, which apparently you are not supposed to go into, especially the boiler room. Not just because the whole building was on the brink of collapse, but also because that's where it primarily lives. So of course, that's one of the first places we wanted to go. We walked around the basement and did some exploring, just to survey the area and to get a better idea of where we wanted to begin our investigation. We eventually did find the boiler room, and at first glance it didn't seem like anything special. Just some broken down equipment, graffitied walls, trash thrown all over the place, and a random school chair sitting in the corner. E laughed and made the comment, must not be a very powerful spirit if this is where it has to live. We all let out a little chuckle in agreement, and continued on our way through the basement. Thinking back now, that may not have been the best comment to make about the thing and its home. We exited the basement, and went into the main area of the school. The main area wasn't any better than the basement. Graffiti and trash were everywhere. The ceiling was falling in, and the floor was collapsing in some areas. We explored the halls, some classrooms, and the gym, and we even found the bathroom where the bullied boy was supposedly buried underneath the floorboards. After exploring for a little while longer, we decided to start our investigation. We set up a couple of cameras, motion sensor lights, and voice recorders in some of the classrooms, the hall, and the bathroom. As we were doing our investigation, 3 of us were in one of the classrooms, while myself and H were in the hall right outside. The 3 of us that were in the classroom were playing around with some dowsing rods and a spirit box. If you don't know what dowsing rods are, they are basically 2 copper rods that can spin freely, and they are used as a way for spirits to communicate with you, either by crossing the rods or pointing. The spirit box is a device that quickly cycles through radio waves and allows spirits to talk through the frequencies. As they were asking their questions in the classroom, myself and H were staring down the hall. At the end of this hall is what we assumed was a staircase, but we couldn't be too sure because we couldn't reach that area due to the floor having collapsed. As myself and our friend were looking down this hall, we heard a loud bang come from the far end where the staircase was. We quickly shined our lights in the direction of the noise, but we didn't see anything. We kept watching for a minute, just in case something or someone came out. But after a few minutes of nothing, we just assumed it was an animal or something. Eventually, I made my way into the classroom with the others while H stayed in the hall. As we are asking our questions and hoping for a response through the dowsing rods or the spirit box, I noticed H in the hall. He was ghostly white and fixated on the area where we had heard that noise prior. I asked him, "What's wrong?" To which he says, "I don't want to freak you guys out, but I swear I just saw someone poke their head out from around the corner and look right at me." We were all kind of like, "Oh, it's probably just your mind playing tricks on you," but he was very insistent on what he saw. Now, we had seen and heard things during our investigations before, but something about the way H looked at us had us all a little spooked. H insisted that we should move on to another area, so we obliged him and went back to the main foyer where we had entered. We were standing there talking about where we should go next when we hear what sounded like a child's laugh coming from the classroom where we had just been. We all instinctively shut up and froze in place. Finally, our friend S broke the silence. "What was that?" Eventually, E built up the courage to go see what it was. He started making his way back to the classroom when something told me that it wasn't safe for him to go back in there. I quickly grabbed his arm and said, "Look, I don't think that's a good idea." To which he brushed off and proceeded to head towards the classroom. A split second later, we heard a loud crunch and crash come from the room, so we all ran to see what it was. When we reached the classroom, we were horrified to see that the floor had collapsed right where we had been standing moments earlier. Had something not told me that it wasn't safe, I wouldn't have grabbed E's arm, and he probably would be at the bottom of the school right now. If not dead, then very hurt. As we stood there in shock of what had just happened, we began to feel very grateful that the floor hadn't collapsed while we were standing in there. We decided that was enough of the classrooms, and we made our way into the gym. The floors felt much safer in there. We continued our investigation, and thinking back now, we should have left after our friend almost died, but we were dumb and wanted to go on. I took the dowsing rods and began asking those generic questions. Is there anybody there? Can you tell us your name, etc., etc.? Eventually I asked the question, can you point to where you are? And to my surprise, the rods pointed in the direction of the darker corner of the gym. Guys, come here, I shouted to my friends. I'm getting responses. As my friends came closer, the rods began to move as well. Now they weren't pointing in the corner anymore. They were following E. Now might be a good time to mention that this is the same guy who almost fell through the floor and the guy who made the sly comment in the basement about this thing's home. I'm not saying that he was being targeted by this thing, but it sure seemed like it at this point. No matter where he moved, the rods followed him. He went left, they followed. He went right, they followed. He ran around me, they followed full circle. This creeped us out beyond belief, so we wanted to know why the rods were following him. As we asked our questions as to why the rods were following him, someone eventually asked, "Are you mad at him?" Then, in an instant, the rods went straight and unnaturally still, and the room fell silent. So quiet, in fact, that it was as if we all had felt death instantaneously. I got this insanely bad feeling as if something very evil had just entered the room. A few seconds later, I felt something strong physically grab the ends of the rods in my hands. Whatever was grabbing them began thrashing them back and forth with enough force to move my whole body, as if they were trying to break them from my grip. As this was happening, noises started coming from all around the school. It sounded like doors and lockers slamming, things being thrown down the halls and all around us, and screaming. Though admittedly, the screaming may have been coming from us, but it didn't help our situation by any means. We were all terrified. We had never experienced anything like this before. Then H, the same guy who saw the thing at the end of the hall, pointed in the direction of the dark corner of the gym and pointed, and let out a guttural, blood-curdling scream. We didn't even bother to look and see what he was pointing and screaming at. The only thing in our mind at this point was, get out now. We all quickly grabbed our things and sprinted out of the school back to our cars. We got in and peeled out of there as fast as we could. We met back up in my place, still obviously shaken by what just happened. After taking a while to process this experience and decompress, we asked H what he had seen. He tells us that as everything was going on, he looked into the corner of the gym and saw something horrifying. He described seeing a massive thing, probably 7 feet tall, standing in the corner. It had unnaturally long arms that were spread out wide. Its head had long, devilish horns, and its mouth was open so wide you could probably fit your head into it. He said on top of that, though, on its unusually large mouth was a smile more evil than you could ever imagine. Knowing something like that was so close to us was bone-chilling. In my opinion, we were lucky to make it out alive. We've never returned to that school and have no intention on ever going back. As far as we're concerned, if that old school was demolished and the rubble was burned, they'd be doing the world a favor. Maybe it would destroy, or at the very least trap, whatever that thing was in there for good. If you know the school, I highly suggest that you never go inside or even go onto the property. Save yourself the possible trauma. Believe what you want, but that night will forever be burned into our minds and haunt us in our nightmares. This next story was submitted on r/paranormal by user Edouin4A and is titled, "What Really Happened in My House?" I'm not one to believe in ghosts, and there's a lot of other people that are just as skeptic as I am, but I had a few occasions that made me wonder. I'll share one of my stories, and I would love to know what you think about it and if you may have answers. I have a close family member that states she can see the dead. She describes it as visions, where she would see deceased people roaming around. To believe you have a gift like that kind of freaks me out. I don't know what my mom was thinking, but for some reason she asked her one day if she sees anything in our house. I wish she said nothing, but she answered with yes, but she's not clear to what it is. Fast forward to about 2 months later, and my dad wakes up at 5 in the morning every day for work, where at 6 in the morning he would wake us up for school, but this specific morning it wasn't him that woke us up. Police lights filled the air, followed by loud talking. Walking out of my room, down the hallway I called for my dad, and he answered and said to come down to the living room. I found him standing with 2 police officers writing down the things my dad said. Scared, I asked him, "What's going on?" After the police officers left, he explained to me that the most bizarre thing had happened. He woke up to all the lights in the house turned on, as well as the TV in the living room. His first thought was that I woke up early and did it myself, but when he got to my room, I was sound asleep. Our entrance to the house is a door, but with a fence in front of it that needs a special key to be opened. When he got to the living room, the front door was wide open, but the fence was still shut. But you can't open the door from the outside by not unlocking the fence. But the weirdest thing of all was there was a pot of boiling water out on the stove. I don't even know how to work with the stove, so it could not have been me. My dad and mom swears it wasn't them. There was no sign of any entries that could have been made in the house, and all the windows were locked from the inside, and we only have one door. To this day, nothing was made of the situation, and I'm still freaked out by this. This third story is submitted on r/scary stories by user KrypticKayla and is titled Midnight Intrusion. In the dead of night, my stomach grumbled, prompting a trip to the kitchen for a late-night snack. As I entered, an unsettling shadow caught my eye at the living room window, a presence that wasn't there earlier before I retired to bed. Silently, I approached the window and cautiously parting the blinds to peer outside. But when I did, my heart dropped and my blood ran cold. There, on the other side of the window, was a man. His face was pressed up against the glass, grotesquely contorted and deformed like something out of a nightmare. A sinister smile stretched across his face from ear to ear, resembling the eerie grin of the creepypasta Jeff the Killer. A sharp gasp escaped my lips as I recoiled in terror. I stumbled backwards and fell to the floor, praying that he remained oblivious to my presence. But to my horror, I watched as his distorted silhouette slithered from the living room window to the front door. His grotesque, contorted visage pressed against the glass, peering in and locking eyes with me as he twisted the doorknob and pounded relentlessly. Suddenly, though, the pounding abruptly ceased. Then, in the eerie stillness that followed, the haunting whir of a drill shattered the silence as he began dismantling the front door. Panic seized me and my heart raced as I hastily ran back to my bedroom, where I snatched my phone from the bed and my car keys from the nightstand before locking myself in the bathroom. In the dimly lit bedroom, I took out my phone to dial 911, only to discover its lifeless screen. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized I had forgotten to charge it before falling asleep. "Shit," I whispered, the unsettling realization amplifying the urgency of my situation. Abruptly, the relentless whir of the drill was replaced by an eerie silence yet again, and my soul almost left my body when I heard the thunderous sound of him violently kicking the front door off its hinges. My mind raced with a million thoughts as I frantically searched the bathroom for an escape, his heavy footsteps echoing through the house. With no other choice, I grabbed a petite statue from the bathroom counter and forcefully broke open the narrow window above the toilet. As the sound echoed, the man rushed towards the bathroom door and swiftly began dismantling that with its drill as well. Perched on the toilet, I hoisted myself up through the window, the shattered glass mercilessly tearing into my skin. Just as I reached the halfway point, the door burst open and the man lunged at me, grabbing my foot in a desperate attempt to drag me back into the bathroom. I grabbed a sizable piece of glass, thrusting it into his hand. His scream echoed as he released my foot. Swiftly, I maneuvered through the window, following to the ground onto shards of broken glass. Writhing in agony, I struggled to rise to my feet, but I still managed to sprint to my car. Hastily entering, I locked the doors, fumbling with the keys. When I inserted them into the ignition, it hesitated to start. I witnessed the man emerging from my house, rapidly advancing towards me. Despite making 5 attempts to start my car, I found myself confronted by the man at the driver's side window. To my horror, I noticed a large butcher knife in his hand as he aggressively tried to open the door, relentlessly beating on the window. After 5 more persistent tries, the engine finally roared to life and I sped away at top speed. I reached my friend's house, only to succumb to unconsciousness due to the blood loss from all the deep cuts on my body. I was discovered on their doorstep, and I was swiftly taken to the hospital and, after a period of recovery, regained my strength. After leaving the hospital, my friend kindly invited me to stay with her while I searched for a new home. I opted for this arrangement, as I preferred not to return to my place given that the horrifying intruder who broke into my house that night to do God knows what to me still remains at large to this day. This next story was posted on r/paranormal by user Unprecedented Horror and is titled Faint Woman Crying and Knocking from Inside the Closet. Couldn't sleep tonight. What is this? It's great that there's a subreddit for these kinds of conversations. Late last night, around 3:30 a.m., I was about to fall asleep. My night out had been cancelled, so I had stayed up, mindlessly scrolling through social media. As I began to fall asleep, I couldn't ignore a noise. It was as if it was in the room, yet it wasn't. I didn't pay much attention until I heard light knocking on my closet doors. My soul literally left my body. It sounded like it was coming from inside, like my right closet door wasn't fully closed, a bad habit of mine. I shone my flashlight towards the inside, but I couldn't see anything causing the sound. Then the noise got a bit louder. It began to sound like a girl or a woman crying, and it seemed to be coming from my closet. I'm easily scared and have seen enough horror films to know not to investigate strange noises, but the crying and knocking continued. I slowly walked towards my closet, gathering my courage. I opened the right door, the noises stopped, and I found nothing. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like a threatening hiss or a growl nearby. I quickly jumped back into bed and stayed awake, keeping my eyes on the closet till sunrise. I usually don't take these things seriously, but I'm genuinely scared. Can anyone explain what just happened? This last story was submitted on r/scarystories by user CIAHerpes and is titled, "I inherited my grandmother's house, but something was already living there." A serial killer murdered my grandmother on her 80th birthday, breaking into her house and stabbing her over 70 times. He had killed other senior citizens in the area with the same MO, but to this day he hasn't been caught. He stopped killing people after my grandmother. She was his sixth and apparently final victim, but that didn't make me feel any better. I was absolutely heartbroken. My mother had died young of breast cancer the previous year, and my father was somewhere out on the West Coast, a hopeless alcoholic who hadn't contacted me in over a decade. My grandmother was my last close family member, and in her will, I got everything, including the house that she died in, but that didn't make the sadness and despair any less. I felt totally alone in the world, and during quite a few low points, I even thought about hanging myself or taking an overdose of prescription opiates. I didn't want to be alone anymore, and I was so tired of being depressed that I would have taken any means to make it end. After a week of endless depression and not sleeping, I started to get so desperate that I began reading the New Testament and praying every night. I would get down on my knees and ask God for help. On the third day, I think he answered. I had fallen into a restless sleep for a couple of hours, the first real sleep I had gotten in days, when I heard a creaking floorboard next to my bed. I jumped up, but the darkness was so thick I couldn't see more than silhouettes. I floundered around and turned on the light next to my bed, horrified to see someone in the room with me. The being looked like an angel with chalk-white skin, totally bloodless and as smooth as polished stone. Its eyes were pure black orbs and its teeth were sharpened to points. Massive white wings covered with tight skin extended behind it in each direction for 8 or 9 feet. The wings absolutely dwarfed his body. He wore armor that glowed like bright silver with chain leggings and spotless glowing metal boots. A soft interior light seemed to emanate from his skin, his armor, and his wings. "Jenna," it spoke. "God has heard your prayers," he said to me. He came and put his hand on my cheek, softly stroking it. "He will help you through this time of sadness and depression. God only wants one thing from you in return." "Anything," I said. "Name it." "He wants you to kill one random person and bring the body to the sacred altar in the forest," the angel said, his black eyes staring into mine, his face only inches away from mine. I felt hypnotized. If you do this, he will reward you with whatever you desire. I felt sick, pulling back as the impact of his words finally pressed onto my mind. What? I asked, putting my hands up in front of my face suddenly, now terrified of this creature. You're no angel. Get out of my room. His smile widened from ear to ear, and his hand reached out in the blink of an eye and smashed my lamp, plunging us into darkness. I fell back asleep instantly, as if by magic, and awoke in the morning to find the broken lamp on the floor. Otherwise, there was no sign of this mysterious visitor. I figured it must have been a dream, and perhaps I had simply reached out and broken the lamp during the night by accident while I was deep in the grips of some nightmare, and my mind had simply added the noise of the breaking lamp into the dream and made up the entire interaction with the angel. It was the only thing that made sense after all. It made far more sense than actually being visited in the night by some supernatural entity asking me to murder people. I went through the door like a zombie, feeling the effects of sleep deprivation more and more clearly. After making a pot of coffee and drinking 3 or 4 cups, I felt I had enough energy to at least leave the house for a few hours. I decided to go for a walk in the nearby mountains. As I walked down the trail, I kept seeing someone peeking at me from behind the trees, but every time I looked, they somehow disappeared, and it looked like a dark silhouette of a human body playing peekaboo with me and constantly winning. I even tried running to the area where I saw the figure a few times, but there was no one around. No twigs broken or bush pushed out of place, no sound of receding footsteps. I couldn't figure it out. I figured either the sleep deprivation was getting to me or I was seeing a ghost. I had never actually seen any evidence of ghosts or demons or anything before, so I chalked it up to the massive, long-lasting sleep deprivation I had been going through and started to ignore it. But when I got home, things didn't improve. I saw a figure peeking out of my closet door, which was open only a crack, and now that it was much closer, I could see the face clearly. It was the face of that nightmarish angel with the chalk-white skin I had seen the night before. It kept appearing everywhere I looked, hiding behind the sofa, lurking behind me in my reflection in the bathroom mirror, and even peeking out of the cabinet where I stored cereal and canned goods. A cabinet which was far too small to hold anything bigger than a cat. But I still saw that face, and every time I got a good look at it, its smile had grown, its teeth growing longer and sharper, its eyes growing darker and more manic with every showing. Now I was truly afraid to go to sleep. I stayed up, brewing pot after pot of coffee late into the night, reading book after book until I started to nod off despite all the caffeine I had consumed. I caught myself a couple of times, but it was a battle I couldn't win, and eventually I nodded off for good. In a half-hypnotized dreamlike state, I saw a cupboard I had never noticed before, opening up in my living room, a small gremlin-like creature peeking out. It was totally different from the angel I had seen, but had the same huge black staring eyes. As I woke up fully, I saw it grow and transform into the white-skinned demonic-looking being that had accompanied me in my room before. Ignoring the being standing before me, I walked right past it and opened up the hidden cupboard. It blended in perfectly with the wall, and if I didn't know exactly where the door was, I would have never found it. Inside, there was a miniature table, tiny chairs, a tiny mirror, and a hole in the ground that smelled absolutely foul, like urine and old dried-up feces. I turned my attention back to the angel standing there, but found instead a little gremlin 2 feet tall with pure black eyes, skin as green as the needles of a pine tree, and huge bat-like ears. It looked small and almost cute in the half-moonlight. "So," I said, crossing my arms and looking down at him, "you're the one causing me all this trouble, huh?" He trembled slightly, raising his hands. "Please," he said in a small voice. "I just want to continue living here in peace. I was friends with the old woman who lived here before, but the bad man came in and she died. I wasn't here to protect her. His small voice died away into silence, the buzzing of cicadas and crickets, the only noise remaining. Well, I said, kneeling down and pinching his long, crooked nose. You are just the cutest little guy I've ever seen. He hissed at me, raising himself up to his full height, which still barely came up to my kneecap. I am not, he said, in an outraged, high-pitched voice. I am the nightmare that haunts the streets. I am vicious. He showed me his tiny fangs and baby-sized molars. At this, I squealed with delight. That's it, I said. You're staying here with me. I swept him up in my arms and gave him a hug. He didn't resist, but his thin arms wrapped around my neck and he put his warm face against mine, sighing in his squeakiest voice. I came back home in the middle of the night from the cemetery, covered in dirt and grime. Uruk, as he had told me his name was, ran out of his hidden cupboard dressed up in a fashionable suit originally designed for children. He loved to dress up and impress me, putting on tiny bow ties and pint-sized fedoras I had bought him. Clothing that made me laugh and pick him up. I was happy to have a companion now, and the depression and sleepiness that had plagued me had left completely. I often fell asleep holding Uruk, spooning him like a tiny teddy bear. Jenna, did you bring it? Did you get it? Did you? Did you? He asked rapidly, his pupils dilating in excitement. I nodded, dragging a tied-up tarp in through the door and laying it out on the kitchen. It was a freshly dead human body, an old woman who had died from heart disease by the look of her. Uruk clapped his hands in joy, jumping up and down like a kid on Christmas morning. He knelt down, using his sharp fangs to rip the skin off her face before moving down to the neck and chest. I left him to his dinner, as watching him eat often made me queasy. As long as I kept him fed, though, he said I was in no danger. He could only eat human bodies, but whether they were killed or died from another cause made no difference to him. At least I'm not alone anymore, and that has made all the difference to me. My prayers had been answered. Hello, if you have made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching all the way through. If you enjoyed this content, please consider liking the video and letting me know which story was your favorite. Each story was obtained from Reddit with express permission from the posters. The music in this video was made by me. If you enjoy simple background music like that, please check out my songs Traveling Soup and Soup Variety, which will be linked in the description below and will show up on the screen right now. Once again, thank you for watching, and I will see you again with another video like this. Goodbye!